Hey everybody, welcome back to Gigs this month. As some of you know, I am what people like to call a digital nomad, so I'm going to preemptively apologize for my very bad internet and my scarf collection that is not mine in this closet that I am currently broadcasting from. If you see my video image disappear, it's to save everyone else the pain of low quality video. So welcome. We are going to talk about indie games, making indie games, being an indie developer, all those things. As always, ask questions in the chat, and I will get to them as you put them in. And I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. We have an amazing panel today, and we're going to start with Aaron. Go for it, Aaron.
Hey, I'm Aaron Melcher. I run a company called Knockout Games, and which is basically just a front for me freelancing as a programmer for indie developers. But I focus on porting games to Mac, Linux, Xbox, PS4, just basically do contract programming with a focus on porting for a bunch of companies. I've been in the game industry for 10 years now this year, and the past 3 years I've been doing this, and it's a lot of fun. I most recently helped release Nidhogg 2 for PS4 and Tacoma for Mac and Linux, and I'm almost done working on N++ for Xbox One and a bunch of other stuff. I just keep juggling projects. But that's basically it. I bounced around the industry for 7 years, and now I'm doing my own thing and having the freedom that I enjoy from my own business. That's it.
Awesome, thank you. Justin, go for it.
So yeah, I'm Justin Pierce. I started off doing like Counter-Strike maps in college, in high school, and during college I taught myself how to do some, Construct was the game engine I was using back then for some of this stuff, and I was doing mostly art and level design. In my senior year of college, I taught myself how to program, and then out of college I was doing freelance game programming to make a living. So I've been doing that for about 7 years now. Currently working on a game called Arms of Telos. I'm going to bring up screen share real quick so I can talk over a trailer. And so, yeah, it's a first-person shooter with full 6 degrees of freedom, zero gravity, and it's kind of my passion project. It's a solo project, so it's a lot of work, but it's kind of why I'm doing this. So that's it.
That's awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Hicks. I'm an independent game designer and musician. Most of my games have been made by a team of 2. It's usually myself and an artist. So I do programming, sound effects, marketing, promotion, trailers, whatever, basically. And I started doing indie games back in 2011. I was really heavily involved in the Xbox Live indie games scene. That channel shut down now, but back in the day, I released 3 games there. And I also was a part of this promotion called the Xbox Live Indie Games Uprising. I was one of the coordinators for that. And basically, we worked with Microsoft to promote overlooked games on that channel. And usually where most people have heard about that is it was featured on the front banner of Xbox Live for a couple of days in 2013. And after that, I signed on with Sony to do PlayStation 4 games. And I released a game called Pillar in 2015. And in terms of games, that's been the one I'm most proud of, and it's probably the one people have heard of out of the other ones. We're at over 320,000 players so far, and it had some good press. Magazines like Game Informer covered it. And after that came out, I've been working on another game for the last 2 years, and we're actually just about to announce it, so I can't quite plug it. But the announcement should be coming towards the end of this month. If you go to my website, michaelarts.net, you can sign up for a mailing list for that. But as a game designer, I'm interested in making games that are meaningful or impactful, but express their message through the gameplay mechanics. I'm interested in like what interactions can communicate with players. So I feel like a lot of times game developers, they use narrative as a way of expressing their message, but I'm interested in kind of interactivity. So that's where my recent projects, that's the focus I've kind of had on things. So yeah, basically that's my career so far. So.
Hi, I'm Renee Nejo. I graduated from the Art Institute of Phoenix, the video game art design program back in 2011. I've been making games almost since then. Like right out of school, I wound up having to do some architectural design stuff, which I absolutely hated. But I wound up picking up contracts slowly after graduation, and I've been making games pretty much ever since. I'll go ahead and do the same. I'll do a screen share so you can see some of my work. But right now I'm working on a game called Blood Quantum, which is actually kind of a personal game that is it's about blood quantum, and I could probably talk a lot about that, but I don't want to get too far into that being a plug. I'm currently the featured artist on the Unity Connect site, and I've won a nationwide game jam with my friend Aaron Robinson. It was really cool because over a weekend, me and my girlfriend made a game, and then the White House talked about it because we wound up winning.
That's awesome.
And it was cool. It was a climate change game jam. So like, I also enjoy making games that have more of an impact, I think, than just simple fun, even though, like, I don't want to sound like a snob. I love fun, right? But
Yeah.
I don't know, like, a lot of the stuff that I feel most excited about making are the things that like make you think, or maybe burst a bubble that you might have found yourself in or something. I don't know. But the games that I've worked on in the past, I contributed to Gravity Ghost. That was a really fun project to work on. I'm currently working on Scale, which I'm really, really excited about. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's a first-person shooter with a non-violent gun where you dynamically resize objects in the world, creating kind of a puzzle solver, like a platform puzzle game, similar to like Portal, I'd say, you know, like, anyway, I'm really excited about that project. And I just finished a small game with Numinous. It's called Hacienda, or Busu, the Spanish learning app, where you you learn how to speak Spanish in the game, and it's a VR Android game. So you explore a hacienda and you learn words through quests and you save them, and it's a really cute idea, actually. Yeah, and I also worked on the Jane Austen MMO Everjane for a little while. That was a really, really fun project to work on.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. A little overexcited. Big Jane Austen fan.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here and offering your expertise. And what I love is that you all have worked on different types of indie games, and now you're all doing something that you're incredibly passionate about. And I think that, you know, I've been around indies since before I was even in the industry, and the one thing that I've kind of learned is that the people who are doing things independently are doing it because they want to work on stuff that is unique and different, and is either you know, exploring a game mechanic that's either never been done before, or they're doing it in a unique way, or they're bringing back a game mechanic that we haven't seen in a long time in a new way, or they're trying to do something impactful and tell a story. And I really loved what you guys were talking about through telling story through the gameplay. I think that is like the next big push for all games, and I think indies have to push that, so then the AAA people can learn from what you all do.
Yeah.
Cool. If you have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and get started with some of the questions that were asked beforehand. The first one is from Chris Pioli, and he asked a bunch of questions, so we'll get through his as we go through the evening. He has is, if you want to find work in indie development, where do you go? Indie devs will post on Craigslist or job sites.
So the artist I worked with, he became a really good friend of mine. He actually came and lived with me for 6 months. He just left recently, but I met him on Newgrounds, and I know a lot of people, even though that site's kind of old, I know a lot of people, they have still met other creatives on that message board, the Newgrounds forums. I've also met people on GameDev.net. And I'd say TigSource is another message board that's really active. They have specific parts in their forum where you can, it's people looking for work, or you can go and ask for a specific type of contractor. I would say, yeah, I've never seen anything posted on Craigslist, but for me personally, I've had good luck on Newgrounds, and I would also recommend TigSource, the message board. So.
Yeah, most of it's going to be remote, and so Twitter and other networking sites where you kind of interact with other indie developers are going to be where most of that comes from.
Aaron, you've done a bunch of work for people. How do you tend to find your clients?
So I'm always I don't want to promote the wrong thing, but so when I started my business, the first contracts I got were honestly, I saw a game I really liked. I wanted to work on the game or provide my programming services, and I just straight up cold called them on whatever contact they provided on their website. The first game I worked on, what was it called? Oh God, I work on too much stuff. Snapshot. I was a big fan of Snapshot back in 2012, and I really wanted to work on it, and I saw they kept missing their proposed release dates. And I was in a slump at the time. I worked on a game called Deadliest Catch, the game, and it didn't feel really good to work on that game. And I wanted to work on something I wanted to work on. So I just, I went on the website. They had a like a chat room on the website, and I just went in there and I was talking to the programmer on the game in his chat room. And I was like, hey, I'll work for free because I have a day job, and I'll help you finish the game. And that's how I got started, really. Like, find what you like, and these people will talk to you. But just the reason why I'm hesitant to say that is that they probably get bugged by a lot of people, and I don't want to promote people just spamming them. But if you honestly have a trade, if you have a skill that you think that could help them, it's not going to hurt to talk to them and like offer your skills. And that's how I've gotten most of my contracts, and then it just waterfalls after that. Once you do enough projects, then people are going to start asking you to help them.
But yeah, you're right though. You have to be proactive about it. I feel like that's a good point to tell people. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't. And like if you're just starting out, you're just learning how to program or something. That's not the right time. I think the right time is to make mistakes on your own, and then when you feel confident of your skills and you want to work with specific people that are working on specific things, you can find them. They're on Twitter. They want to talk to people, and I think that's a great way to get started on working what you want to work on.
Yeah, early on I used the Unity forums a lot to find freelance work. I don't know if that's still a thing for doing that now that there's certifications or not, but
I think that message board's still pretty active. Yeah, I'd say there's plenty of stuff on there. So.
Yeah, most of it. Yeah, another thing to point out would just be it's not going to be a lot of full-time jobs in the indie space. It's going to be a lot of sporadic contract work, freelance stuff.
Yeah. Like I said, my first stuff I did for free because I just wanted to work on something cool. And then eventually I found stuff that paid.
I still don't feel like I have an answer to this question because it's like miraculous I have a job right now. I mean, I hate that question only because there's no right way. There's just no step-by-step thing that you can do to ensure that you get a job. There are just things that you can do to boost your chances at getting a job, right? Like you have to have a portfolio that's competitive. Like your art skills or your code design, whatever it is that you're going for, it needs to be strong enough that you are hireable to begin with. Second, you've got this other hurdle of like people are more likely to hire their friends, especially in indie space, because there's the financial part of it. Is that when you get money, who do you want to give it to? You're going to want to give it to your best friend if they can do the trick for you. But you know, and so like part of it is taking your network extremely seriously at all corners, and being kind to the people that you meet at these networking spaces. But I mean, it's like, I can't tell you how to be a nice person, right? Or how to be easy to work with. So it's a combination of your work, being able to show what you can do, and your capacity to communicate that, and to also be like available to the people who are willing to work with you. All of those things could go right on Unity Connect or at a GDC, or they could all just not line up, like if you just don't meet the right people at the right time. And so the best you can do is just kind of keep working on your craft, keep working, just keep making stuff, and keep meeting people. That's my best advice.
Yeah.
Meet people, make stuff. No, I think that is great. And you know, I do consulting and contracting work as well now, and I find that a combination of all of these things has worked for me. Either word of mouth from people I've worked with before, or I have just cold called people, or like I randomly went to lunch with someone at GDC and they started asking me business questions. And like Aaron, I didn't charge for any of that. I just hung out with these people. And then I started telling indies that I would do work for them for free for an hour. And out of that, I've gotten quite a few different, short-term contracts and one long-term contract. So I think offering your skills to kind of prove yourself for free, while I would never recommend that if you were looking for a full-time job, if you're doing contract work, I can definitely recommend that. All right, cool. Next question is from Chad Coop, and he asks, would anyone please go over experiences of the ins and outs of publishing self versus third party and intellectual property, especially from a copyright standpoint when third party plugins?
Does anyone want to say something about that? I don't want to just jump in, but
You're up.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so I mean, I can't, the second part of that question, I don't have an answer to, but the first part, I have self-published some things. And I'd say, what I would say is that in terms of actually, getting it on storefronts, Steam, Xbox, PlayStation 4, a lot of that stuff has been very streamlined because we're in the digital era. It's pretty easy. There is on console, the TRC or whatever, where you have to go through and make sure the programming technical side is meeting certain standards. And I would say, you have to take out a bit of your time to make sure that's happening. But even then, it seems to be like that's getting more and more streamlined. Like I've talked to people who went through the TRC process years ago, and basically they described it as being hell on earth. And it's become a lot more easier now. And I think it's going to keep getting easier because the platform holders, they know that there's a lot of smaller teams going through this process. So they're trying to kind of gear it more towards that. In terms of publishing, the big thing that I spend a lot of my time worrying about is just marketing and PR before the release. Obviously, that's a pretty big deal right now because there's so many games coming out because this process is so easy, right? We're getting like a flood of games everywhere. Back in 2010, when I was first starting, like getting on Steam, that was like the big time. Like anyone who was on Steam, you're guaranteed to at least have enough money for a year or so, right? And that's not the case anymore. It's basically like the App Store. It's very flooded, and just having your game up on these platforms doesn't guarantee you anything, right? You have to put in a lot of muscle on the marketing and PR. And I mean, even veteran indies are getting lost in the mix. Like I just found out about a game that came out last year by a guy who has a huge following. I heard nothing about it because it's just so much stuff coming out. So I'd say, in terms of if you're going to self-publish, make sure you spend a lot of time trying to make connections with the press. Knowing what the angle is to talk about your game, knowing that you shouldn't, say everything. Know what's cool about your game and don't say everything all at once. Plan a process of, okay, this month we'll talk about this and save this for later. Keep the hype going. Maybe we can talk more about marketing PR later. But for me, as a person that self-publishes, I spend most of my time, a very small chunk of it, like actually getting it on the platform, and the rest of it, like trying to get the word out so people actually know it's on the platform. Right. And one quick word, I'm talking a lot and I'll shut up, but in terms of like working with a third-party publisher, I would say unless they're very well connected, like if they're Double Fine or like Devolver Digital, and they can offer you, they're very well connected with the press, and working with them is going to get you a lot of press coverage, and they're very well connected in that way. That's the only time I would actually work with a publisher, because a lot of times these smaller publishers, it seems like they're just going to do things you kind of do yourself. And indie games don't make a lot of money, so I usually kind of recommend people not get into a situation where you're paying back money or you owe someone because you might not make much money to begin with. So that's kind of my comments on that. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of indie developers think they have to have a publisher because they don't know how to do marketing on their own, so they go out and look for anybody. And I think a lot of these smaller publishers have taken advantage of that, where they have a kind of a concrete contract that'll work in their favor, but not yours. And so indie developers don't have expertise in that kind of law area, and so they're easy to take advantage of. And so what I usually do is I go look at the catalog of their games, and a few well-known games that you've heard of is not enough. You want kind of a saturation of games you heard of, because if they have a couple games you've heard of, but they have a lot of games you've never heard of, then that kind of tells you that they're willing to take on projects that they don't necessarily believe in, and they'll just kind of sit on and take your cut, 30% or whatever. So that's kind of my rule of thumb, is to try and find publishers that have a lot of well-known games, because that kind of tells you that they really commit to those games and make those games work. And that's also a double-edged sword, because those publishers will have a higher bar for what they accept and what they take in. But I think it's kind of, if you can't get with somebody like that, it's probably not worth it. You should probably just self-publish and keep that cut.
Yeah, if you are going to be working with a publisher, especially if you don't really know about their background, reach out to your network, to other indies, and see what they've experienced with working with people, if you can. If they haven't, that could be very telling. And also, if you can, have an attorney. It's one of those things that, like, it's really hard to afford. But if you can afford a lawyer, this will pay off for you in the long run, especially with larger publishers. And there's a couple I know of who do exclusively, like, independent game developer law stuff for this. So get a lawyer.
Yeah, bouncing off that, even if you don't have friends that have worked with publishers, you can just look at their catalog and contact some of those developers yourself, cold call them, and see if you get an answer there. Another thing I've heard people recommend for me is with the contract, make sure that you kind of get them to make promises, like concrete promises, like they will put in X amount of dollars, or they will put in kind of X amount of ad time or something, depending on the circumstance. If it's kind of vague and they just tell you they're going to talk to the media and all that, then there's not really a guarantee that they will do anything, and so they probably will not do anything, because that costs them money and time. So yeah, because their contract is going to require things of you, and so it kind of needs to go both ways, where the contract also requires them to do something.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Get a lawyer. That's what I took away from all of that. No, great. And I think we might chat a little bit more about marketing and PR if we have some time, kind of at the end. Questions from Chris. How did you acquire funding to budget your game in pre-production? So have any of you done any interesting ways of acquiring money, or been part of, I guess, budgeting projects that you've worked on?
I feel like the dirty little secret of the indie community is that a lot of us are doing freelance work on the side. So we're splitting our time between working for other people part-time and doing our own stuff. And I think that's way more popular than people realize.
Funding your own game is like it's a double-edged sword, really, up front. It's either you're working on your game and you have the money, but you got to get the money somewhere, so you wind up running like a second business next to it. So then you're kind of putting in the extra double hours. And usually we do that, I guess, through freelance contract work, things like that. But I've been reaching out to my network on this particular subject about how to raise money in other ways. I don't recommend the Patreon Kickstarter route. It is a way, but you have a lot of other kind of baggage that comes along with that is maybe not necessarily what's best for the project, but maybe just not for mine. And what I've heard, or what I've gotten back, and things that I've even considered, is like giving workshops and charging head space, like for a person to come take a workshop, like a game design class or an art class. One really cool piece of advice that somebody who was really powerful told me once was that if you want money, ask for advice, and if you want advice, ask for money. So not a bad way to go about it is kind of reaching out to your network and asking for advice about how they got money. And you can either get another contact, somebody that you could cold call, or somebody that you could at least try to contact in an event or something where you could have a pitch deck and you could pitch for money like that. That's the best way, I think, to get money, but it's also the hardest, at least it is for me. I'm a creative. I don't know how to ask for money. It's really, really difficult.
Yeah. I guess to add on to that, I've seen a few surveys. Gama Sutra used to do a few back in like 2013. I've seen some Twitter surveys that have been pretty thorough, and there's a very thorough survey by the Indie Mega Booth. I think they've been doing them every year, but they basically ask financial questions about the developers who are there. And I would say that the people who show at the Indie Mega Booth are probably, for the most part, not always, but generally that's more of the top tier of people in the indie development scene. They're probably the top earners, I'd say. And they asked, one of the questions was, where do you get your funding? And I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was quite surprising how many people said they get their funding from family or spouse or something like that. I mean, me personally, my parents have been lucky enough to support me in that way. I know it's not glamorous, but I actually would say a lot of indies have support from spouse or family more than you would think. Maybe they're not vocal about it because I think there's this like shame thing that comes with that. But I've also seen a lot of people, like was mentioned, do a lot of contract programming work on the side. And to a lesser extent, I've also seen people, they have a good paying full-time job and they save up a bunch of money for like 3 or 4 years, then they quit and live off those savings for a while. Yeah, so I mean, that's what I've seen personally. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
One thing that I've seen with some of my clients is that they will basically work a full-time job and then pay other people to make their game, which is really interesting. It's a thing that I didn't know happened until I started doing freelance, and a few indies that I've worked for, just people who have either not been in the industry or are in the industry working at a AAA company, and they're making money, and other programmers and designers, you know, which is really interesting. I'm guessing, you know, that's pretty similar to you, Aaron, is like games, your own game, but you're jumping onto their vision to kind of to work.
I'm losing you, Grant.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
I think I got what you were saying though.
Yeah. I guess my kind of the question that comes out of that is, teams that you're working with, have you seen them get funding in a unique way? Because obviously they're paying you to work on their project. Does it tend to be through publishers or?
So I've been thinking about it while you guys have been talking this whole time, and most of them have savings from their previous titles. I've seen a lot of, I saved up a lot of money at my day job and now I'm using it all. Then there's crazy Kickstarter successes like Hyperlight Drifter and My Number 9 that I worked on, and they just had a pile of money from Kickstarter. But I mean, I think those are way more unique now, obviously. And but yeah, I am seeing a lot of like, they've moved on to the next project. They don't want to deal with the porting, so they're paying me to widen the distribution of their game. But unique, I don't know. I see. I don't get all the details about how they get funded. I just get some of that funding for helping them out. But I know that it seems that the ideology seems to be, if they can get funding, they take it, and they'd rather get funding externally than from internally. And if they're fortunate enough to do it, then they do it. And they're just careful about it. But I don't. I know. So if you're going on Xbox One, if you're going on PS4, if you're going on consoles that want stuff on their platform, you have leverage there, and you can get some funding from the platforms. But even if you can't get funding, you can get marketing muscle and placement if you have a product that they really want to sell. So I know Hyperlight Drifter, yeah, they were funded by Kickstarter, but that goes so far. They got a lot of help from the platform holders because they were just had open dialogue with them, and they did a good job of, you know, just jumping on whatever thing the platform asked of them. They were able to jump on, hit the dates for sales, because you'll get offered stuff, and sometimes people will get offered stuff and they won't be able to meet the conditions of it and miss out on sales and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And good placement in stores, so that's important. But I mean, by that point, you already have the games. That I don't know if that answers any of this funding questions, but yeah, any way they can get it is all I know. Well, personally, so I started this business so I could make my own games. I've been stuck in the contract hole just because I'm getting work and it's good money, and I haven't had a house yet, so I've wanted to buy a house, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can get, if you don't have funding, you can get stuck doing contracting. And thankfully, the contracting that I do, I actually enjoy, so I don't mind doing it full time. But eventually, I do want to get back to what I wanted to do originally. And I think that's easy to happen if you need to have money. You get stuck contracting longer than you might want to.
So I've worked on projects that have been funded in pretty much every way that was mentioned so far. Like Everjane launched a successful Kickstarter. We raised like $112,000 on that. And then later on, it wound up getting funded by like savings from their day job. And then later, like personal money, like it became, and then like after that, I've also worked on stuff where we've had like worked with contracts with clients who had funding that would pay us for these other things. And currently, I mean, on Scale, we're talking to a handful of different platforms and publishers for finishing funds and publishing, muscle and PR muscle and all of that. And I've noticed, though, that on projects where personal money is used, it usually hurts the project in the long run, because you wind up making such emotional, irrational decisions that are not best. It's not what's best for the product or not what's best for the design, because maybe we had been spending so much time making this mistake. And I mean, $5,000 to me is not the same thing as $5,000 to Sony. They're both $5,000, but they do not equate to the same thing per person or per party in that way. So I've actually experienced a lot of that kind of personal money being the driving force in decision making on these projects, and it's really kind of terrifying, because it's almost impossible to kind of make objective decisions for the progress of the project itself. I don't know. I just kind of wanted to throw that in there because weird thing. I thought. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one thing that Aaron said that it actually applies to AAA as much as it applies to indie, and I didn't know this until I started being in these meetings. Is if you go to Sony or Microsoft, even with a big game, they're going to offer you money, but the money is actually not real money. It's funny money. So what that means is they're going to give you, $50,000 in banner space. So they have a dollar amount that they charge for their banner space on their platform, and they're going to give you dollars. The indie thing that you did, Rise of the Indies, right? And that was the whole thing there, right? Was they gave you guys banner space, ad space on the front page, and that was probably a certain dollar amount. And it's the same thing with AAA. When you're in AAA, like you go to Sony and they're like, oh, we'll put you on the front page for 3 days, and that equates to $100,000 of us invested in your project. So just know, if you are talking with them and they start speaking dollar amounts, it tends to not be dollar amounts that you can then eat from. It's not beer money, it's dollar amounts of funny money.
Yeah.
But that funny money equating to more real money through purchases. Cool. Another question from Chris. He asked a lot of great ones. He actually had a follow-up one here that I thought was interesting. Was funding used as a barometer of public consumer interest?
You're cutting out again.
I don't know what other people's on that. What's that?
Cutting out again, but it sounded like you were talking about fundraising as a way to generate interest for publishers or investors.
Other investors,
like a Kickstarter to get interest from an investor, right?
And what I was saying was, if you have a hugely successful thing, maybe. I mean, that's how it started. But I've not heard of many people getting massive amounts from their, Kickstarter that 120 people backed.
Yeah, I think it has to be big, or it doesn't matter.
Cool. Next question. Emotional pressure when your game doesn't sell well, or when you are unable to find success in your work.
Well, I can speak on this one. Oh, did you want to go? Did you want to go first? I saw like a facial look of I want to say something.
I'll follow.
Okay. Yeah, so one of my projects back in 2012, I think it was like a massive failure. And it was actually when I had a lot of eyes on the project, we were doing that Uprising promotion. So it was like double the fall type of thing. And I'll just like speak honestly, like I really couldn't deal with it for a while. Like I kind of had a mental breakdown. Like I had to get away from the computer, stop looking at the internet, because I'm getting like tweets at me like saying nasty stuff and all that. So I had to kind of detach myself. And eventually, after a few weeks or so, I kind of returned to kind of look at the feedback and see why exactly wasn't right. Like why weren't people having the experience I wanted them to have with my game? And I found that, maybe this isn't a popular opinion, but I find that reviews, like written reviews, are generally not very useful for figuring out problems like this. What I've had success with is kind of like watching YouTube Let's Plays, because I can see like every single move that people are doing. I can say, okay, I see right here the design's not working like it should be, and I can do like a better analysis like that. So for me personally, like how I overcame the failure, and the reason for my failure was my design didn't hit the points, right? I messed up a lot of my game design. I kind of overcame that or learned from the failure by studying Let's Plays and kind of being my own critique, I guess. And when you're doing like solo indie work like this, you have to be you have to be your own critique, right? You can never be satisfied with what you do. You have to constantly be pushing yourself and being critical of everything you do, right? And I think a lot of people, that's kind of a turnoff, but I'd say it's pretty essential to this type of work. So yeah, for me, that's been my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something I'm probably dealing with right now. The game isn't out yet, but it's just really stressful approaching that time. I think it's also worth mentioning that headlines can kind of mislead, where you read the headlines about all these success stories, and it's kind of a survival bias where it seems like it's happening all the time and it seems like an achievable goal. But I think as the industry gets more and more competitive, indie game industry is becoming more like the indie music industry, where a lot of people start bands, but they're almost never gonna like actually make them enough money to live off of. And so I think if I could do it all over again, or if moving forward, the advice I usually give is it might be better to do it more like a hobby. So have a full-time job and do this on the nights and weekends and kind of have fun with it, have fun with the process of it. Yeah. So that you're not kind of killing yourself to get this game out only for the likely scenario of it not making it big, to kind of put the killer icing on the top. Because yeah, it is stressful and it is demoralizing. Not just, to me, critique is not so painful as just not people playing the game. Like you spend months or years working on a game and it doesn't really get played, and that to me is really painful. And that's happened with pretty much everything I've worked on, and chances are it'll keep happening. But
well, I'd like to add on to what you said. Again, I want to point to the surveys I brought up earlier. Gama Sutra did some back in like 2013, Indie Mega Booth. There's been some stuff on Twitter. And the reality is most indie developers make under $1,000, right? And this is including like mobile developers and stuff. And that's not, again, kind of like earlier I was saying where people get their funding, like this isn't glamorous, but it's reality, right? Like very few people, like Justin said, are making enough money. I mean, honestly, I'd say if you made $10,000 to $20,000 in profit, I'd say you've done better than most, right? And that's nowhere near enough to like live, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in perspective, my first commercial release was like in 2011. It was an iPhone game. And it only made a few $100, and yeah, it's a pretty cool game. It's not a bad game, but to put that into context, like that's just like a few hours of contract work. So it just feels really demoralizing to be like, well, why did I waste all this time working on that game? So I would say it's important to enjoy the journey as you make the game, and not pin all your hopes and satisfaction on the success of the game after it's done.
Yeah, exactly.
Fitting.
Cool.
Anybody else wants to talk about it?
Cool. Next question. I really think that's surviving shipping any game is hard. AAA to, or obviously with indie, because with AAA you can say at least I've made money. But I also encourage people to not read the reviews, because the people who write reviews are generally not your player base. Not saying reviews are bad, but just I never read them personally. Do you keep track of festivals and submission deadlines? And if so, where is that posted?
I do know of a website called gameconfs.com, GAMECONFS.com. That has like a big schedule of conferences and stuff like that worldwide, and you can add it to your calendar or something like that.
I actually make my own list because I think depending on the kind of project that you're working on, not all cons or events are really good for your project. For an example, the Jane Austen MMO, being at NerdCon Stories was perfect because those were totally the player base. Like literature nerds would love an MMO in a Jane Austen universe, right? But that might not do so well at a PAX, right? Yeah. And you'd think that that's almost like kind of counterintuitive because PAX is such a, gamer present con. And for Blood Quantum, what I'm working on, I feel like Indigenous Comic-Con is like the best place for me, even though like there's only maybe, a couple thousand people that show up. They're all people who would be really excited about there being a video game about Blood Quantum. Whereas, if I went to, a Comic-Con, they'd be like, well, why do I care about that? So it's a little bit of quantity over quality or quality over quantity and knowing what the right show is for your product, right? So not all cons are created equal, in my experience so far.
And I also have another website. It's called eventsforgamers.com. They also have a pretty big list. For me, though, personally, I kind of just keep track of a list of things I think are the ones I would want to go to and show my game. And I would say that I know a lot of indies that they find a lot of local events and conventions. They want to like travel and go around and show their game at all of them. And I would actually recommend against that, again, because that's a huge expense. I don't think you're getting much of a payoff in return for those expenses, right? I would say that the value in showing your game at these events is that you want to make appointments with the press and have that face-to-face interaction and hope that they write about your game. And I'd say that's the key thing you're wanting to do at these conventions, right? So if the event you're looking at going to doesn't have a big press presence, I would say probably don't go to it if it's going to be a lot of money. If it's like a local community thing and it's not going to cost much, go for it. Because I feel like a lot of times these are great play testing opportunities. But just keep in mind that it's usually a lot of money to go to a lot of these things, and you want to be smart about what you're getting out of it in return, right?
Yeah, it's really important to kind of budget that out because a lot of them will be way more money than you're going to earn back on them. I will say that there are some small conferences that'll be like $100 or $200 for a booth. So those can be good for kind of practicing your booth setup and practicing your pitch while you explain your game to all these people passing by. And there's usually not going to be much press at these kind of events because they're really small, but it's mostly for practice and for play testing because you'll notice when you get to watch somebody play your game, it's a lot better than just getting feedback on a forum or something because you can actually see the mistakes they're making. It's similar to what you said earlier about watching people play on YouTube.
Yep.
I'd also say, to go off what he just said, I also feel like a value in these events, like he said, the play testing and the pitch. I think a lot of people don't realize that the pitch usually needs to be iterated on, right? Usually your first pitch isn't too accurate of what the game really is. And I found that I've had to iterate it like maybe 4 or 5 times iteration on my pitch. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
I posted one website too called indiegamejams.com, which is a really well put together site that shows a lot of, well, it doesn't just show a lot of game jams, it shows like every game jam that's going on online or locally. And every time I go to it, I get kind of overwhelmed. So just be aware that there are like 40 game jams like running all the time. So
our game jams.
Yeah. Like, I mean, look, there's like a War Child charity game jam, like one that's just for Magic, one that's vehicles. Like, you can just find your niche and join a game jam team through this website, and that's a cool way to kind of find people to work with as well, I think.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to how do you get a job. Those game jams are good, little portfolio pieces, little like ways for you to kind of do an art piece in a new style or something like that. Hide your portfolio.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Have any of you worked on or been part of a game that has gone into a bundle?
Me, I have. Yeah.
Did
I
you
think
get
that
good
was-
returns from that?
I'm sorry. What did you say? What did you say, Grant?
Did you get good returns?
Oh, good returns.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is what I would say about bundles. Unless it's the humble bundle, don't do it. They're good for like a quick injection of cash. And like I went on some Twitter rants about, people should just boycott bundles completely, and people come back like, well, some people don't make much money and they need the quick injection of cash. So like maybe if like you have no sales, maybe it's a good idea to do the bundles. But personally, I would recommend against any of the small ones, because what I've seen happen in my past games is that, well, first off, you get a lot of, at least for me, I get a bunch of people that will resell the keys, right? They might buy one and get two type of thing. They resell the keys and are selling your game at a low cost, and you're not getting any of the money from that. I also have gotten a lot of negative reviews on Steam from people who have maybe played the game for like 10 minutes, but they got it from a bundle and are like trolling, right? So the Steam rating is down. And I'd also say that in the long term, you're devaluing not only your game, but indie games in general, right? Like we're in this culture now where like people don't want to buy indie games unless it's on a 90% sale or in one of these bundles. And it's, I've seen a lot of debate about who's to blame for this. I'd say like everyone kind of contributes to it, right? Developers need to stop putting their stuff in these cheap bundles and devaluing their work, and gamers need to start, wanting to pay for people that are, spending 2 years of their life on these projects, right? Pay what they're worth. So, yeah, I'd say no. Maybe someone else has a different opinion on that, but.
Yeah, I think they're generally risky, especially early on. Like you said, they're going to cannibalize your review scores. You're getting people that are less interested in your game. And so if
It's
you're
like
trying to
coming
build
from another dimension.
me,
Oh, that sounded really weird on my side. Sorry.
is the microphone okay?
Yeah, I'm hearing weirdness too.
It's really crackly.
Yeah, just kind of crazy. I'll just mute him for a minute so you can try and figure that out.
Yeah, I've been in a humble bundle, and it did give us a boost in sales, not nearly as much as initial launch. And having a sale on Steam later, so like you can kind of see the sales spikes go a little bit. We by no means made a lot of money overall in the project, but it was considered a little bit more successful than most indie titles, so that was good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I agree. I wouldn't bother with a bundle unless it were humble bundle.
Is my mic better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
You're
Yeah,
back.
I was gonna say, I generally agree with what they were saying, especially early on, because like you said, it's going to cannibalize your review score. So if you're trying to build momentum, that can put the brakes on it, because these people getting it through the bundles are less interested in your game, right?
Yeah.
Because they might not even be getting the bundle for your game. They might just try it and be like, oh, I hated this or whatever. So generally, probably not a good idea. Maybe it wouldn't hurt if it's like way down the road and the game is already kind of trailed off and it's not really selling anymore anyway.
I used to work for Humble Bundle, and I would help them port the games to Mac and Linux for the bundles, and I don't have much work from them anymore. So you can see where that's trended. They started out being a really cool thing, but now that it got so popular, kind of, like you said, cannibalizing sales and all that.
Mhm.
But so Snapshot, the first game I worked on, they pretty much released in a bundle, and I think it kind of hurt their sales because they released the bundle. They got a huge injection of cash because it was a really good bundle, but then that was it. Like everyone had the game already. So
Yeah.
so it can hurt if you do it too early, and if it's not a humble bundle. I don't even know what Humble Bundle is doing anymore. I think they've switched their focus over to the monthly subscription service, which is kind of like a bundled thing, where they actually don't have the whole like pay a penny for the game thing, because you're paying like $10 a month or whatever instead of paying a penny for the key and then reselling it type.
It's kind of like PlayStation Plus, right?
Yeah, that seems to make a little bit more sense, but it's still you can run the math and make an argument one way or the other still.
Yeah, it tends to be now that they're selling like older games too. So you're like paying $10 and you're getting like a bunch of games from like 4 or 5 years ago. So I think that would make more sense to be part of a bundle. If your game is like, I don't want to say dead, but like 3 years old and not making any money, then maybe you be like, sure, I don't give a fuck. Like,
Yeah.
you know, throw it in there.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We have just about 10 more minutes here, so a few more questions. Have any of you worked with like YouTubers, Let's Play streamers? Have any of you worked with any of those people?
A little bit. I wouldn't say too much. You mean just like reaching out and having them like play your game? Is that what you mean in terms of working with them?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
If we can get them to review it, play the game, get marketing that way.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd say a couple of quick points on that. I'd say that when you're reaching out to YouTubers, when you're reaching out to press, you're trying to give them a story. The YouTubers, they don't really want a story, just give them the game, right? They just want to play the game, get to business. I'd also say that I would bank on them playing your game one time, right? So I usually say we have one YouTube push. There's exceptions to this. If it's a game that has a ton of replayability, like The Binding of Isaac, you might see a series of things. But usually I would recommend, like, you know, let me just put it like this. I see some people who do a big YouTube push during early access, and then when their game actually launches, there's none of the YouTubers wanting to play the game because they've kind of spent that one token or whatever you want to call it in early access. So what I'm saying is not absolute. Maybe they do play it more than once, but be smart and be aware that you might want to plan that when you think it'd be most effective to reach out. Oh, and also there's a bunch of lists. If you Google like big list of YouTubers, I think it's called, you can find a bunch of emails to reach out to the YouTubers. Yeah.
Yeah. Adding on to that, I think I don't have a lot of experience myself, but the advice I see is look for YouTubers and Twitch streamers that specialize in your genre that would like your game, and don't blast it to people who play games that are totally different than yours.
Yeah.
And also go for streamers of all sizes. Sometimes starting with the smaller, medium-sized streamers will kind of build up into larger ones. So yeah, don't ignore the smaller ones, but also watch out for scammers just trying to get keys.
Yeah, I've had a lot of problems with that. A lot of people saying that they're like a certain YouTuber emailing me. And what makes this a little tricky is that sometimes the YouTubers don't have their email or contact information public, so it makes it more difficult to confirm. So I've seen a couple of ways of going around this. A lot of times I see people say, hey, just send me a message from your YouTube account on YouTube. That way I know for sure it's you. But there's also a new service, maybe you guys know what it is, but it's a new website that's trying to connect YouTubers and developers together. So it kind of like authenticates the YouTubers, and then developers get on board. I have the link for it in my press. I can't think of it right now. Maybe if you Google what I'm saying, like YouTube contact thing, but that seems to me to be a future kind of way of reaching out to YouTubers, is that type of approach. Yeah.
Cool. Have any of you put out a passion project without any real expectations for return?
That's what I'm working on right now, actually. So yes, short answer.
Yeah, same for me. Yes, everything I do is a passion project. I have no expectations for, basically. Yeah. Justin too, probably. He probably agrees with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, am I fooling myself? I want returns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aaron just has kids. That's...
I mean, with Blood Quantum, it's kind of an experiment in educational games, and people don't necessarily want those type of messages in their gaming experience, and some people do. And the win condition in it is a little bit, not traditional. So the way I plan on marketing it eventually will be, it's free to download with optional donation. So if you like what we're trying to do, you like what we're doing, then I want your money.
Yeah.
But if you don't like this kind of thing, you're bored, then feel free. If you can't afford it, I still want you to have it, because I kind of have this idea that I think it would be great if you're interested in learning, and if the only reason that you can't get this game is because you don't have the money, you're exactly who I want to have it, Yeah,
that's how I feel too. I have to say, maybe Aaron has the right idea. He's not doing a passion project. He's just going to the people who have the money, who have had the success. It just yeah, he's got it. He's got the right idea.
I'm piggybacking off the passion.
Yeah.
Passion.
Hey, and how did that work for you at the Indie Choice Awards this year?
I got free drinks. And
it paid for
piggybacked
itself.
off their passion, and you got to drink because of it. So hey, there you go.
Yeah, so hey, Aaron, he said earlier that every single game that was nominated for what best game at IGF you'd worked on. What's the story about that? Let's hear that. That's my question.
Okay. So Quadrilateral Cowboy was the first contract I picked up that paid. I saw it at a convention and I fell in love, and I talked to Brendan and he was super cool. I didn't know him. It was one of those cold call things, but the cold call was in person. I went to his booth and was like, gave him my spiel. And then we worked on and off for like 2 or 3 years. And then it came out, and I didn't expect it to win stuff. I just thought it was really cool. So that was just kind of luck. And at the same time, I took on Hyperlight Drifter like a year before the awards, which I kind of knew was going to get in there because I saw the Kickstarter happen and I was like, this game is cool. Mm-hmm. And those guys worked in the same office space as Brendan. So I was like, Brendan, dude, I want to work on Hyperlight. Like, you need to talk to them. We need to work this out. And it worked out. So that was kind of like I was able to step into that job. And those were the 2 games, right? And then the Witness One stuff. I worked on the Witness Xbox One, and that was just because I worked on Braid, and then he wanted to put it on the Xbox One, and he's like, hey, just put this on the Xbox One. I'm like, okay. So I did it.
That's awesome.
And no, that was just like 3 games that had started development at different times in like 3-year span, all like released at the same time.
Yeah.
And then I was like, hey, Brendan, can I get a ticket? This seems like a cool thing to go to. He's like, sure. And yeah, it was fun.
And it was really funny for me because I knew Aaron had worked on some of these games, but what I didn't know was that he was there, and I was just sitting there. As I mentioned before, Aaron was actually my first boss, and I was sitting there, and I see his name like come up on screen, and I'm like, huh.
I didn't know he was going to do that. I kind of was like just enjoying the ticket to the show, and then he surprised me with that, and I was like, dude, why are you putting my name on the screen right now?
That's awesome, man.
I just helped with some of the programming, and afterwards he was like, why didn't you come up on stage? I'm like, dude, I'm not going up there. You made the game, dude.
I did see you on camera, which is how I knew you were there, and then I ran up front and tackled you. So I was like, hey, I know that guy.
It was magical. Hopefully I can go up there with my own game eventually.
There you go. And now you have all the connections. So so we're actually out of time. So I'm going to ask each of you to kind of give your last kind of bit of advice / thoughts that anyone who might be wanting to get into the indie space would benefit from. With Justin.
Okay. So yeah, I guess my advice is that there's no like 1, 2, 3 steps that you can do to find success. And it's good to read advice that other people post, but you can't take it as gospel, and you can't assume that's going to be enough to make everything work out. And so my advice is to really think hard about what makes your game different and what you can do differently to suit your game. So, marketing advice, like what works for another game might not work for yours. What worked 3 months ago might not work for yours. We're all operating in the now, and situation is always going to change. So really think hard about what makes your game unique and what kind of unique approach around that game you can construct to get the word out and to make it a success.
Cool. Michael.
Yeah, for me, and I think we touched on this earlier, but I think the most important thing is that you should love the process, love what you're doing, be passionate about the idea. I feel like the people who have had success financially in indie games are the people who are more invested in the process. Because if you look at a lot of people's success stories, a lot of times, like we were just talking about John Blow, like he went in debt like $300,000 before he worked on Braid, right? And when he was working on Braid, he crashed on his friend's house and on his couch in his buddy's house. And Edmund McMillan, who did Super Meat Boy, lived in poverty for a long time, right? And they just kind of persevere because they're in love with the process, or they want to explore this idea that they don't think anyone else will be able to bring to life. And that's what kind of drives people in this type of arena, right? If you need that paycheck every week, this isn't right for you, right? Like, is that the money's not really here. Again, like statistically, I think that's backed up pretty well. So just love the process, love what you do, and I think the rest of it will fall in place, I think. Yeah.
I would say careful how you define success and mitigate your expectations. I think that if you're comparing yourself to some of these Cinderella stories, which are always the ones that people tell, you're going to find that your expectations were wildly unfair and not true. And sometimes success for you can just be as simple as finishing the project you're on, or just, you know, making a small thing with a friend, and that counts, right? And it is hard. And I think another thing that you're going to hear a lot, especially if you're asking for advice from people like us, you're going to hear a lot of people tell you, oh, don't do this. Don't do this. Financially, it's not a good idea. It's very risky. It's this, it's that. They're going to stack a bunch of reasons why this isn't a wise decision. And if that is enough for you to not want to do this, then you might want to reconsider. But I say that if you really want to do this, push right on through those naysayers, push right on through that. Because I think then you actually have a shot at really finishing a thing and making a thing. And don't worry too much about the label. Sometimes like an independent game developer can be somebody who just makes a small thing while you're working whatever job you're doing. And then there's also people who get hundreds of thousands of dollars to back their project, but it's usually not an overnight success for them. I don't think I know a single one who was. So persevere. It's hard, but I think it's worth it if you really want this.
I think one of the best things I've heard at an award show was one for Little Big, and a bunch of awards, but one of the awards was Best Debut Game. And Mark Healy got up and said, "Best debut game. I've been doing this for 20 fucking years." And it really is. It's really true.
Yeah.
It is.
I don't think it becomes an overnight success. Everyone I know who's been successful has made a lot of failures.
I recommend a talk by Alexander Bruce. He gave a couple of years back.
Yeah.
Yep. It's called Overnight Success, 7 Years in the Making. It was one of the best GDC talks I've ever heard. And if you're asking this question for advice, I'd say that talk is going to do a lot for you.
Nice. Awesome. Thanks. Aaron?
Cool. Yeah, I saw that talk in person. It was awesome. Anyways, yeah, you're not going to work on what you want sometimes. Maybe you're lucky, but make what you're doing the best it can be. Focus on your craft. I fell in love with games when I played Sonic as a kid. I fell in love with programming after 6 months of banging my head against a book. Like, it's work, and you might not work on what you want, but you can always focus on your craft if you don't like the content that you're working on. And then eventually when the opportunity comes up, you'll have the skills to execute the way that you want, or at least close to, you know, what you think is perfection. But yeah, just have fun, enjoy it. If it's tough, it's tough, but just, yeah, do your best.
I think Aaron is, because Aaron and I worked on some games that we were very much not interested in, but we had a lot of fun working on those games. In fact, I've worked on games that I'm much more interested in, fun as we had working on games that we were just doing it for the experience and the paycheck, but we own our crafts. But, all right.
I think Grant was just saying how cool I was, and I think he's signing us off somehow.
It always cuts off when he's like, the most important thing I've ever heard ever was.
Whatever. It's not important. It was just me saying bye.